Welcome to the Marshall Pruitt Podcast, our Week in IndyCar series presented by Cooper Tires. Have our friend Craig Hampson on, race engineer for Sebastian Bourdais at Dale Coyne Racing, a four-time Champ Car champion. And after spending a little over an hour on the phone with Craig answering your questions, I can tell you this might be one of the most insightful episodes we have ever done, particularly on the race engineering side, the technical side, understanding the sport, so many things. Craig is just phenomenal at what he does. I'm really thankful he and I have struck up a friendship over the years so that we have an opportunity to bring in one of the best, someone who is just renowned up and down on pit lane as being the race engineer's race engineer. Boy, not only is he fantastic at his day job, but also as an educator, as the son of educators. Not a surprise that Craig is phenomenal at fielding all the questions that came in via Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit. So thank you for sending all of those in. Got a couple questions for me. I will come to those here in just a little bit. Wanted to start off with probably the biggest news, and I realize this is news for many, but not for all. That coming from our friend Robert Wickens last week, who posted a clarification as to his current and daily physical status, and that of being a paraplegic, of being paralyzed from the waist down and not having use of his legs. Hit a lot of people like a ton of bricks, and I'm not sure how to phrase this. Knew that that day was coming. Also wasn't a complete surprise for many of us in the paddock. I had someone ask, I apologize, it might have been Facebook, might have been Twitter, but someone had asked about this, and I mentioned to them that we do our best to take care of those in the family, and there was also a little bit of a proviso that when we have truth and accuracy coming forth. A couple years ago when Hinch had his big crash in Indianapolis, a little bit of a different regime at the time in IndyCar with its communication side, and there was, for whatever reason, an active effort to underreport the severity of his injuries. And this was after his life had been saved, after he was in, let's just call it, stable condition, and again, after we knew that things were good, for reasons that I don't fully understand. There were intentional decisions made to underreport what Hinch went through. And I know that at the time, Robin and I caught a little bit of hell from some drivers for being the ones to say, but that you guys aren't telling the story. You're telling a cleaned up version of the story. And in this case with Robert, there's, however many of us that knew the day after the crash, the day of, knew about this, knew about his situation, which was just revealed. And I would say it's not so much a matter of keeping secrets. It's if you look at what was released about his condition, what wasn't being said, but also what was being said. For me at least, I thought that there was honesty and accuracy being offered. And for the most part, the big takeaway was there were no grand conclusions being made. Hey, this has happened. It is a final thing. It is a fixed thing. These injuries, on all the way down to the paralysis side, they are done. No change possible. No improvement possible. We weren't there. Therefore, there were no grand statements made about Robert's physical abilities. Some of the more straightforward items, he has a broken this, a fractured that, those things which were easily quantified, those were, I believe, indeed put out and shared. But in terms of the wider, longer-term prognosis, those items were not offered because, honestly, it was very much of a daily thing, which Robert just expanded even more in a more recent update than the first one that came out last week. saying, hey, as swelling goes down, as more feeling returns, this is a improving situation. We don't know how far the improvement's going to go. Obviously, we hope it's a full recovery, but just trying to share a little bit of the backstory. So rather than Robert coming out or his family coming out and saying, this is the fixed situation he's in, boom, it was, give you some updates, we'll tell you about the trauma suffered, but we're not making any grand proclamations because it could all change tomorrow or next week or next year. I think one of the things which maybe caught folks off guard a little bit, and I know Robert felt a little, he said it was unintentional, but felt a little bad about, is there was a video shared of him being on a bicycle type machine, and the machine itself was powering his legs compared to his legs powering the machine. I don't know if that was adequately or fully described in the Instagram post and whatnot. Keep in mind, Robert is painfully intelligent, but he's also not sitting there thinking, how should I accurately and perfectly describe every little thing? He's not treating himself like a big media event, like he's his own PR guy. And, so maybe there could have been a little bit of clarity there. I think there might have been a misperception that his legs were the things doing all the work. Wasn't the case. And so I know that after giving it some thought, he came to the conclusion where it was like, okay, need to let you all know that I am indeed dealing with paraplegia right now, and he is going to fight his behind off to put that in the past tense. So just a little bit of timeline there. His family, and rightfully so, had some very, very strong words for some folks. Not necessarily just Paul Tracy, possibly someone at the team Robert drives for, about speaking without their permission, about Robert's status, and so on and so forth. So you really do have a situation where folks want to be smart about this and want to be in control of the information shared. And at least for what I've seen, I haven't seen them ducking or dodging or trying to hide anything. And so therefore, to me, this is something where, even though I guess some of us could have rushed to the good old interwebs right after the crash and wrote that Wickens is paralyzed and all kinds of other things, thumbs up to them, I would say, for treating this properly, giving folks an immense amount of information and access to his condition when some others in the sport, notably a sports car driver, for example, his family has fiercely protected any and all inquiries about how he is doing, declined, not just declined, but refused and gone on an active countermeasure effort to stop anybody wanting to find out, interview, get information. So of all the ways a family could treat a situation like this where a driver is very heavily injured and not returning to the cockpit immediately, huge credit to Robert and his family for, in my opinion, really doing things the right way and taking their time, not rushing to say anything, because frankly, whether they said everything or nothing, it's not going to change a thing. All the work that has to be done is between Robert, his physical therapists, and his body, trying to talk to his lower extremities and get them working on demand. I had news this morning that Fuzzy's Vodka will no longer be a part of the Ed Carpenter Racing Super Fun team. Felt sad to see that brand go. I know that on a very superficial level, I'd fallen in love with a lot of the liveries that they'd come up with. Also, as I mentioned to Ed when we spoke this morning, know that it's definitely a lot more work for them to find a replacement, but we were confident we might have been writing this, Robin or I would have been writing this story 3 years ago, 4 years ago. There's been a couple times where we thought we were going to be writing this, and things have continued. So, good on Ed, good on Fuzzy's Vodka for extending this and making this partnership work from 2012 through 2018. Even better news, Ed says, their departure wasn't necessarily unexpected, and we are all good to go for next year in terms of budgeting. Had the COTA test today, first time for all of the teams that were there: Andretti Autosport, AJ Foyt Racing, and also Carlin Racing. Carlin was there, super top secret. RC Enerson was in the car. Had asked them last week about who was testing. They declined, didn't want to talk about it, and there was, for reasons that make sense to them, this was something that they did not want to publicize. Had it been a Formula One driver, some of us were like, so is Marcus Ericsson testing? I could understand why you might want to keep that piece of info locked down, but regardless, hope we see Enerson in a Carlin car or somebody's car. He has been talking with a lot of people in the paddock, at least from the very brief sample size that we had for him in the 2 races he did with Dale Coyne a couple of years ago. Looks like the kid's got some talent, and I would not mind seeing more examples of that, getting a wider sample size to see what this kid's truly capable of. A couple other items here. Went down to Monterey last weekend, hung out a little bit. It was just a day trip, nothing official, but went down and hung out, and also spent some time with our pals Brian and Colton Herta. We were trying to figure out why, at least for the weekend, since this is Brian's return to racing at Laguna, why they didn't temporarily rename the Corkscrew after him. He and Colton were racing the Brian Herta Autosport Hyundai TCR Tin Top sports cars, and ended up winning their class at the 8 Hours of California. So that was pretty cool. Just, love that kid, love the old man. They're just really good people, and I'll tell you, Colton gets it. My wife and I were driving home, what was it, on Thursday from an appointment. It was a long drive home, and had phone connected through Bluetooth to our car, and pops up Colton Herta, and I'm like, oh, hey, cool. I'd actually been intending to call him as soon as I got home to say, hey, I'm coming down tomorrow. You want to do a visor cam or something like that? And he beat me to it by a half hour and said, hey, I'm going to do a visor cam tomorrow. You want the footage? So I'm like, you know what? You get this, man. Rather than just going and doing your thing, you're trying to think about, hey, what can I do to, invite more folks in, hopefully enjoy this little sports car diversion that I'm doing. But just, come on in. Well, let's make something a little bit bigger and more inclusive out of this activity. So I think we're going to see Colton just really continuing to do that, like a lot of young drivers who fully get it and fully understand that extending their brand only helps the series that they're working in. Quick personal note here. So I'm recording this at 7:01 p.m. Monday night. My wife and I are leaving in less than 12 hours, heading north a ways, and tomorrow is big surgery day. And on top of lots of prayers, if those are on offer for her, not thinking I'm going to be on the desk working or filing much, if anything. Tuesday, tomorrow, probably Wednesday, maybe even Thursday. Who knows, maybe even for the rest of the week. She'll be home recovering from surgery, and that is where my focus will be. Trying to be a smart little work monkey today and tonight to put together a couple of things that I will file in advance that can be run in the coming days. So it might look like I'm actually filing new content, but a little inside baseball here. I'm doing it all today and tonight, so it looks like I'm busy for the rest of the week, but we'll have all my focus on my lady. And so other than that, I also mentioned that because we'll see what I get a chance to write. Been hearing some things from very impeccable sources that we might have a final direction on Marcus Ericsson, and if he will be in the IndyCar series next year. I know that going to Carlin, an old team of his, was really thought as the answer. Everything that I've heard, not from some reports I think that have made the rounds online, but actually from closer sources, that he might actually be driving alongside James Hinchcliffe next year. So depending on whether I'm able to write that and report that, or if one of my other racer colleagues is able to get there first. Not saying it's going to happen, just saying, would I be surprised if I read news that Marcus Ericsson is driving for Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports next year? Not at all. Would I also say that do team owners have a feeling for when I know something and then not answer their phone? Yeah, some of them are pretty good at that, and I think I'm about 4 phone calls into Sam Schmidt with 0 returns, which is not a criticism, that's not a complaint, it's part of the game. So wouldn't be surprised at all there. On the Carlin front, another thing that I've heard from a few really good sources is could Max Chilton be doing the inverse Ed Carpenter routine and leaving ovals off of his 2019 calendar? Again, something interesting. I wish that I had time to spend Tuesday and Wednesday, whatever, chasing all this down. Maybe someone else on Racer will be able to do that. May happen, might not happen. Have heard it's definitely a possibility. And a few other things, again, with R.C. Enerson testing there. Part of me wonders if Carlin Racing next year is going to be a team built upon people doing partial seasons. Will they have anybody who is truly full-time every round? If Max opts to do only the road courses and street courses, it might be a little bit of a challenge, but again, it is early season. All right, I'm going to get to a couple of questions. I'm going to pick my favorite question from last week and make sure that our friends at TorontoMotorsports.com send off a Week in IndyCar presented by Cooper Tires t-shirt, and then we're going to roll in our main man, Craig Hampson. All right, let's get to the couple of questions you had for me, and then let's rock and roll with Craig. Reed Alford says, what are your favorite racetrack food menu items? I see how it is. Ask the fat guy a food question. All right, Reed. Okay, buddy. All right, all kidding aside, is there anything on the IndyCar circuit that rivals or surpasses the Martinsville hot dog? Well, I'm a little ignorant. I've never been to Martinsville, so I can't tell you about what compares to the Martinsville hot dog, Reed, but I can tell you that, good Lord, on top of having some of the best racing and definitely the best feeling in the air of just about any track we go to, Road America also wins on the best smells. Yeah, and granted, if you are a vegan, you might actually dislike Road America because the smell of bratwursts and this and that and just, yes, they do wonderful, wonderful things with dearly deceased animals there. And you throw in all kinds of other cool foods to go with it. And yeah, if anyone has something better than Road America on the IndyCar calendar, tell me about it. I know Miller loves Indianapolis. The pork tenderloin sandwiches, that's just part of his DNA. He loves that nonstop. But yeah, good old Elkhart. It is. It's just a fine place to dine. So I would suggest that. Darren Dubois asks, Marshall, has Gabby Chavez been officially released yet to look for another ride? If we pivot off the word officially, Darren, I've heard nothing on that front. I know that when I recently asked Gabby for an update, he said, I'd love to talk, but I can't, because I know that he and the team are trying to figure that out. What are next steps? We know that they are going forward with 2 drivers that aren't named Gabby Chavez, unfortunately, so maybe whenever they get things wrapped up, you'll be able to not necessarily fill me in on whatever the terms were, but at least give me the high sign that he is free and ready to drive for whomever else. I think, I have to believe, folks, at least looking at the Indy 500 and maybe a couple of other oval rounds, if they're going to have a vacancy, should definitely be considering young Mr. Chavez, former Indy Lights champion. We'll also mention that, I don't remember who it was I was speaking with somewhat recently, but knowing that our pal Ricardo Juncos is moving into the IMSA prototype category with a DPI, a Cadillac DPI, and that Gabby has done some fine work this past season in a Cadillac DPI on a couple of guest call-ups. Boy, Juncos could do worse than trying to get Gabby into one of the team's Juncos Cadillac DPIs, while also maybe possibly looking at him as a resource on the super speedways if they're going to have a young driver coming in, or someone just relatively new to the experience. Having Gabby as a teammate, again, that'd be pretty darn smart. Not saying that there's anything there, just saying that thinking about teams that would be able to get the most out of Gabby's expertise, Juncos looks like a place where on the IndyCar and IMSA side, man, they would be sharper as an organization with him in the fold. Let's see, we're going to go to Anthony Mahone, who asks, with how excessively expensive off-track testing has become, could the smaller teams benefit from having on-track testing being opened up? I would have to say 100% yes, Anthony. And it's not just because of how expensive off-track testing, I call virtual testing, has become. Also, there's just so much a young or new or less fortunate on the financial front organization can grow and become by just getting on track, working more together. All of your mechanics, your engineers, everybody over the wall, working on a car, going around a race track. It's one of the things, and this is a duh, Pruitt, but one of the things that you don't get when you go up on that 7-post shaker rig. You don't have the driver sitting inside going, yeah, a little more of this or that. You don't have the mechanics doing tire changes or, just running through their routines. There's no rapport building going on, really. In, a driver in the loop simulator, obviously the driver and the engineer are going to be able to work together there, but, whether it is just regular lap-based simulation, software crunching, all the other things that get done to try and improve a car or its development off track, it's just not a big team building exercise. So yeah, definitely value if you can get that younger team, newer team, smaller team out to the racetrack, even if you have a really bad test day and a lot of things go wrong and you make a lot of bad decisions on which direction to go with the car. It's all beneficial. At least you learned what not to do. At least you highlighted where you need to improve as an organization. It's hard to do when you're just stuck in the shop and only have just a tiny handful of days to go to the track between races and figure out how to be better. I guess you could think of that in the same way like the NBA. They've just recently kicked off their season again. They have the full preseason training camps. They have practice days between events. Imagine if, for the most part, they said, well, you can have 5 practice days between games this year. But other than that, you just essentially need to show up for the next game, figure out how to play with one another there. Well, the bigger teams, the wealthier teams, the ones with more all-stars and whatnot, they're obviously going to figure it out faster and better and be better. The teams with more rookies, smaller, etc., they're going to suffer as well. So, yeah, a little bit weird that in a sport where everyone talks about how chemistry, communication, the real human-based relationship side of the sport is what differentiates one organization from the other. What's the one thing that we are doing more and more of to, quote, cut costs? Restrict teams from being a team, getting together, figuring out how to work with one another. So, yeah, a little bit of a weird thing. Not a big fan of it. And as I've also said many times before, whatever thing you clamp down on, you can no longer do this in the name of saving money. It's usually around something vehicular-based. Teams will find a way to spend it somewhere else, to replicate it, do something as similar as possible or otherwise. So the money's going to get spent, maybe just not in the area you clamp down on. So part of me wonders why you bother clamping down at all. Final question here goes to Michael Bredick. He says, hello, Marshall. Next year, the pole for the Indy 500 is not determined by driving, but by a wrestling match. That's my kind of question, as you know. Which match type would you choose, and which driver will win? He said, my choice, a Royal Rumble, and every Rumble has a surprise entrant. My surprise would be Al Unser Jr. as the last entrant, and he wins the match by simply throwing all of his weight around. A big smiley face at the end. You know, Michael, I think I would go for a match type. I think I would follow in your step. I like where you're going here with the Royal Rumble. Throwing all of the opponents over the top rope. Last man standing or woman standing wins. Who to go with, though? See, that's the problem with IndyCar. Way too many. Admit right up front, I'm a lover, not a fighter. I mean, Dixon, Pagenaud, Rahal, 6'3". I mean, he's a big old guy. I'm a lover, I'm not a fighter. I mean, Will Power's the obvious choice. He's a punchy bastard. We know he grew up fighting just for fun. I mean, that would be an obvious choice. He's just not physically imposing. I mean, part of me wants to go with Kanaan, even though, again, he's one of the shortest IndyCar drivers. But, man, that guy's just built like a tank and strong like a tank. He's only a part-time guy. I'm going to go with Connor Daly. I got to go with Connor. Wrestler, I mean, he's got that wrestler physique as well. He's got a real fighting spirit about him. All you got to do is watch some of his videos. Guy knows how to party. He knows, he's not afraid of abuse, whether it's abusing himself or receiving it. So I think Connor, again, not a giant guy. It's not like you have to be super big to win this. Granted, we really don't have any super big IndyCar drivers, but, Newgarden sticks out a little bit, but, can we get him to take it seriously? Joseph strikes me as a guy who would have fun, slap fight a little bit, and he'd just be laughing in the corner and waiting for someone to throw him over the top. He's too much of a sweetheart. Who else might be a bit of a sleeper on this topic? I mean, again, I think Daly might be the guy, but who might chime in as a real surprise? Hunter Ray, yeah. There's a fiery guy there. He's also, one of the bigger guys in the paddock for sure. I'm not sure about Rossi. I mean, Rossi's kind of got the physique, tall, rangy and all that, but again, I think we're talking a lover, not a fighter here. We won't even talk about Max Chilton. That's definite pure love there. Man, I'm running out of ideas. This is bumming. It's a great question. That's bumming me out, though. Okay. Again, part-timer, but if we brought Sage Karam in, I think he might do damage. Obviously, we know his wrestling background, but that kid just strikes me as someone who can be so single-minded. Didn't say simple-minded. I said single-minded. That, yeah, he might just go around and wreck stuff until no one was left in the ring. So I'd say of the more regular IndyCar drivers, Connor, that's just who he is. But if we could kind of call up any one of the drivers who drove this year, yeah, I think Karam. Karam would lay waste. He'd be posing the whole time. Even if it wasn't required, he'd definitely come in shirtless. There'd be some sort of bearskin rug that he'd lay on. I'm not sure. He'd do a little bit of his Wilhelmina modeling, but yeah, I think, Michael, we'd have to go with Sage Karam as the real winner here, but definitely Connor as well might be able to throw down a little bit. All right, last item for us here, picking my favorite question from the previous week, sending them a t-shirt courtesy of TorontoMotorsports.com. It's actually not a question. I just thought it was great, and it really added to the episode with Michael Shank. That came in from Brian Mang, who says, not really a question, but I wanted to point out that I caught Mr. Shank at the end of Petit Le Mans taking out the trash. He said, I think it says a lot about the character of a team owner who's doing the grunt work after a long day. Congrats to his team on the podium finish. Brian, I just thought that was great. Great recognition, and really, I think, revealed a deeper side to good old Michael Shank, who could easily instruct someone else to do that dirty work. But no, the rest of the team going over the wall, sweaty, worn out after 10 hours of competition. He felt that was the right thing for him to do and give the guys a break. So, Brian, send me a DM here on Facebook. Give me your address and your t-shirt size, and we will get you something headed your way from TorontoMotorsports.com. All right, off we go with one of the best in the engineering world. Craig Hampson, welcome to the Week in IndyCar and the Marshall Pruitt podcast, presented by Cooper Tires. Thanks for taking some time at the end of the workday on Monday, and thanks for coming back and helping answer more questions from a lot of fans who love having one of the world's great race car engineers at their disposal.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm glad we're giving me something to do on my long commute home from Dale Coyne Racing. So,
there we go.
Good to talk, as always.
Well, I've taken the time to cut and paste as many as I can that I think will fit in the 45-ish minutes, maybe an hour. We'll see what exactly how much time we have. Cut things into both technical and then general sections. And which one shall we go with, sir? Which one? And
I will take technical for $200, please.
Now remember, all of your answers must be in the form of a question.
In the form of a question. I won't do that right, but
okay.
we'll talk about whatever we can.
Now the first one here is from Daniel Kincaid, and I think there's a little bit of an assumption here, but that's fine. Daniel says, at Portland this year, many teams were running stagger in the car because it's predominantly right turn motor racing track. How much goes into setting up a car on a road course with stagger? It's unlike an oval, which is only one direction. Portland has a few left-hand turns as well. Is it a compromised stagger setup then? Question mark.
All right, interesting question. Okay, so when we talk about stagger, that almost exclusively refers in our world to a difference in the size of the tire between the left and the right, and that's done on Indy cars with the rear tires on ovals.
Yep.
So the right rear tire will be bigger, left rear will be smaller. We measure their diameter or circumference, and the difference of the two is called stagger. However, what I think the writer is asking about would be, in my world, called an asymmetric setup.
Yep.
So you set up the car to take one direction corner faster than the other ones. You basically compromise some of the corners to make it better in the other ones. Usually the way you would look at that is you'd run some simulations, and then you would count the amount of time that you're grip limited going in the left-hand corners versus grip limited going in the right-hand corners. And if it's significantly different from one side to the other, then you would run an asymmetric setup. So you can do that with things like cambers, specifically on the tires. You might cross-weight the car and run a different amount of weight between the left front, right rear, and right front, left rear. Those are your two biggest things. I suppose you could do tire pressures, items like that. To be honest, though, we tend not to get too carried away with this sort of thing, because when you do it, the car, when you stand hard on the brakes, it doesn't want to go straight anymore.
Yeah.
And the drivers get very bothered by the fact that the car is attempting to shoot itself off one side of the track when you stand hard on the brakes. So not all that asymmetric usually at a road or street course.
And often when we're talking about an asymmetrical setup outside of an oval, we'll be looking at spring rates for sure to do that. But back to Craig's point, Daniel, it tends not to be a big thing. Hey, we've got a 5,000-pound left rear and a 1,000-pound right front. It's usually not some sort of crazy number because, then you get a car that starts doing really funny things when it's not turning, and that's not good. Let's see. This next question, bit of an open-ended one. I'm not sure if I fully agree with the premise, but that's fine. This comes in from Joseph Petrie, who says, what will keep these cars on the ground? Cars getting in the fence has been a pretty consistent issue in the IRL IndyCar era. I mean, there's a couple of things here that aren't technical if we're looking at answers up front, Craig. Obviously, if we're talking about, say, Champ Car era that you were involved in, there weren't a lot of ovals on the schedule. So there weren't the kind of scenarios we're talking about where cars are doing 230 nose-to-nose, side-by-side for lap after lap, and little things causing them to get airborne. So, I would say there's some situational things to consider before the technical side. But let's maybe start here, Craig. We've obviously had IndyCar working hard since we had a couple of liftoffs leading up to qualifying at Indy in, I believe, 2015. We haven't seen much in the way of this since then, but what are your thoughts on, are there more measures that come to mind to maybe further reduce the ability for open-wheel cars getting airborne?
Well, I mean, the question is was clearly in reaction to Robbie's unfortunate accident at Pocono, which was pretty horrific. And yes, that car got really high up into the air and unfortunately got up into the fence, and the fence did very bad things to the car and to Robbie. But if you watch the accident, it wasn't an aerodynamic launch. The two cars touched, one spun around, and then the nose of one car was the launch ramp for the other one.
Yeah.
So if you look at something like that, you say, well, the clear answer is that the cars can't touch each other. If you touch wheels or touch bodywork or touch spinning items together when you're going over 200 miles an hour, there's a real strong chance that something's going to get launched into the air. And kind of that was the whole purpose behind things like the bumpers that we used to have on the DW12 and in the aero kits. But the decision was made that those bumpers didn't alleviate the problems that we were having, and they were also causing additional debris on the track that we didn't like. I personally think the Pocono accident, and maybe some of the other ones we see, is a product of the difficulty we have running close together, following and making a pass. The cars are really affected by dirty air right now, particularly in super speedway form. And I think what you're seeing out of the drivers is they're very desperate to hold on to or gain positions on, in particular, the starts and the restarts, because they say, look, if I lose a spot here, I'm never going to get it back under normal racing conditions, or if I can gain some spots here, no one's ever going to pass me back. So the level of aggression on the start is way beyond what you would ever really want to see in a 500-mile race. We preach patience. It's a 500-mile race. It's really long. But they're saying, look, I've got to gain 3 or 4 spots here or I'm never going to get them. So that's, to me, the biggest issue, is what we're seeing there. And I think we want to canonize the guys when we see these really crazy restarts and they'll pass 5 guys and drive around the outside and split, between cars. And it looks amazing and the fans are really excited by that. But when that goes wrong, that's exactly the kind of situation that can cause an injury. So I think some of that is in the driver's hands, that they have to decide, hey, I don't think we should be taking those sorts of risks. The cars are very, very safe now compared to where they once were, and I'm very thankful for that. Robbie is alive. Sebastian, after his crash at Indy a couple of years ago, he seems to be much okay. So the advances that we've made are pretty remarkable, but I think one of the side effects of that is the drivers tend to forget, or at least put off to the side, that if you don't show respect for each other, you can get really hurt doing this. So that's kind of where I'm coming at from that angle. In terms of once you get up in the fence, gosh, I'd love to see a different fence. I'd love to see something that doesn't rip the car to shreds like that. But I don't know what that answer is, and I do know whatever that answer is going to cost a whole lot of money. And it's money that I'm not entirely sure the sport has available right now.
Yeah.
And I said to the guys who drove for our team, and it was a sad thing to have to say, but I said to them, the unfortunate fact is that fence is not there for you. That fence is there for the fans. That fence is there for the insurance companies, but that fence is not there to protect the driver. And once you're up into that, all bets are off. And that's the current reality of the sport.
Stephen Kilsdonk asks, are there any areas of the current technical rules that Craig would like to see changed? Perhaps limited air developments allowed by teams, larger window for wing angle usage, tighter damper restrictions, or something extreme like DRS? Curious what Craig, the mythical technical rule maker, might open up or cut back on in a fantasy world.
Wow. I can get up on my soapbox here. So there's actually, I would have two different hats on for this one. And the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to put on my Dale Coyne Racing hat because, we are a small team. Dale pays for a significant majority of the team out of his own pocket. Finances, we must guard our pennies carefully. And things that cost a lot of money are really bad for us and much better for big teams like a Penske or an Andretti. We are never going to be able to match them salvo for salvo in a spending race or a technical war. It's just not going to happen. So for a group like Dale Coyne Racing, we would argue that you need to keep things really clamped down. And the biggest expense right now is the damper rules. Whereas the car is a spec car, and we have to ask permission even to drill holes in certain places, and we have to use the exact bearings they tell us to use, and all the parts come from Dallara, and it's really, really limited. There are almost no rules for dampers, shock absorbers. And the dampers are... That's where the grip comes from. It's the ride control, the stability of the car, the consistency of the aero platform, the variation in the tire grip going over uneven surfaces, the security of the entry, the balance, all of that is coming from the dampers. And in addition, several years ago, IndyCar allowed something called an inerter inside the dampers.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's an energy storage device, making the dampers not only velocity sensitive, but acceleration sensitive. So the big teams, and we'll use Penske for an example, but Ganassi for sure, they design and build their own dampers, lock, stock, and barrel, every little bit. There's not a thing in there that you can buy anywhere. And they have people whose job is to design those things. They have shaker rigs they can run them on. They have virtual models that they do the analysis with. It's a big, big program. You could easily spend millions of dollars on your shock absorbers. And if you had a big amount of money to spend, that is where you should spend it, because that's where the differentiator is in this series. So Dale Coyne Racing, I think we'd like to see the damper rules clamped down, and I think we'd like to see actually spec dampers. And I don't mean spec, everybody has to run exactly the same settings, but a spec manufacturer of damper, a kit of parts that you can use, you can select and mix and match those parts, but get the costs under control and contained. That would be the same kind of rule that existed in Champ Car in the last year of its existence in 2007 with the Panos. All right, now I'm going to take that hat off.
All right.
And I'm going to put on my Craig Hampson I got into racing because it was cool hat.
That's a good hat, by the way.
I hate spec racing. I got into this because I wanted to design race car parts, and I loved Formula One, and I loved prototypes, and I really wish we could design our own parts and develop the cars a lot more than we can right now. And again, that comes back because of money. So the rules are constrained because they don't want teams trying to outspend each other. But would be neat if when we see something in the car that we think could or should be better, that we just design some bits and make them and make it better and try and outthink everybody else. That is really limited. We can't do that. I'd say 98% of the car is extremely restricted, and sometimes that becomes really frustrating. You have to send in a rules inquiry saying, can we, modify this part to a fairly small extent because it's hitting on this other part, and that's a frustrating way of going racing. So I really wish it was back to the time when, hey, if you wanted to design your own car, go for it. I watch Formula One, and I'm cars, but part of why it is the spectacle it is they're spending $400 million a year to make that car. Maybe there's a happy medium in between, but ultimately right now it comes down to finances.
Yeah, we'll just tell Dale, you only got to spend $200 million. See, half of Formula One. It's all good.
Just sell more Sonny's Barbecue. We just need to open a few more restaurants, and off we go.
Next one's from Joseph Ostrowski, who says, what kind of lap simulation software do you use, if any, and is it fully transient system or quasi-static?
Wow, we are kind of the wrong team to be asking that. At the highest levels, the teams are using fairly sophisticated simulation software. There's a package called Demola, which is extremely popular within the motor racing world. So a lot of teams start with that to build their own simulation models. And those are all singing, all dancing. They've got everything going on, including dampers and very sophisticated tire models. Teams will either buy or write their own plugins to expand the capabilities. Usually the Demola type model is used to drive a team's simulator, something like that. We are not that team. We're really limited on the people we have and the money that we have to spend on such things. And honestly, and this is me being honest, even if we had a good chunk of change to spend on some cool software, we don't have the time or the people to run that software or to validate it and verify it. And a lot of the results you get out of your modeling software is based upon your tire data and your tire information. And tire information is extremely limited and hard to come by in this series because the tires are spec and we don't keep our hands on them. It's not like we can get a whole bunch of tires and take them off to a tire test facility and gather our own information. So it becomes more of a challenge, and we just don't have the people. So we use very simple quasi-static type simulations at our team. And for what we're trying to get out of it, it gets us 90% of the way there for the basics going into a race weekend. Do I wish I had more? Absolutely. Do I wish we had a driver in the loop simulator to go to on a regular basis and evolve our setups and try different packages and run through the problems that we experienced during the weekend and try and solve them? Yes, absolutely. I sure wish we could and did, but we don't.
Well, and as I've mentioned a few times before on the Week in IndyCar, being able to purchase the simulation software, that's usually within the financial capabilities of each team, right? That's usually not the big obstacle to overcome. As Craig alluded to, you then often need to hire some additional staff to then make use of that simulation software to reap its full benefits, and those people you are not finding hanging out at your local Starbucks. Those are usually heavily degreed people who cost a lot of money.
People. And to give you an example, I think this is how a Formula One team will do it. Before the race weekend, their driver will have a day or more in the simulator to preview the race weekend, try specific solutions to problems they anticipate having, get ready for that weekend. Then during the race weekend, they will have a test driver in the simulator with a full race engineering sort of crew. And real time, as their practices are going on, they will be calling back to the shop and using that driver and engineers and simulator to try and find solutions for the problems that they're experiencing during practice. And I suspect that group would work through the night and then give them deliverables to try and improve the car for the next day. And then after the race weekend is over, they would take their driver and they would go back into the simulator with the entire race engineering crew, and they would rerun the race weekend to make sure that the simulator gives the same answers and feels the same and the same sort of feedback that the driver experienced through the race weekend. That's a huge project. A lot of money.
Yeah.
But if you're going to do it and do it right, that's how you're going to do it.
That's how you do
Just owning a simulator isn't going to fix it all. Just owning the software isn't going to fix it all. Just having the people isn't going to fix it all. You have to have the all-encompassing program. And it's my view that if you're not going to do it right, you're probably just wasting your money.
Let's see, going to go to Ryan Perry here. A little bit of an open-ended question. Going into this past season with the new Universal Aero Kit, which was harder for you, Craig? Finding speed or finding the stability that our man Sebastian Bourdais was requesting?
Well, they're really tied together, but our lack of speed is rooted in a lack of stability. Obviously, we look back through the season and try and analyze our strong points and our weak points. It honestly didn't take much analysis this year because we know that our weakest point by far is our street course setup. We sort of suffer the same problem everywhere we go, but it varies to a degree, and then the amount we suffer in terms of lap time because of that lack of stability will vary from track to track. But we're really suffering from stability at the street courses, and specifically rear grip security on entry. And Sebastian is very bothered by the feeling that the rear isn't under him or the car wants to spin. He ends up running an unrealistic brake bias because of that lack of security. And we have thrown everything I know what to throw at it, and we really still haven't solved it. So this is one of our great challenges this winter in our 3 test days that we're going to get.
All 3?
All 3 test days, yes, to try and make that better. Because unless we get the entry security better where he then, doesn't feel like the rear wants to spin or lock rear tires, we're just not going to go fast enough on the street courses. So that's a lot of our focus. And I think that applies to a lot of teams, but I think there are drivers who are substantially more affected by it than other drivers. Like, for example, if you look at the Penske team, it's pretty obvious that Pagenaud has been less happy with the car than Willpower and Newgarden. And I'm sure, given the fact that Simon and Sebastian were once teammates in a sports car program, that, Simon does not like how the back end of the car feels. And, at that team, I'm sure they're looking and saying, well, Will and Joseph are fast. Simon, just drive it. And Simon says, it's not working for me. We need to do something different. And the car is a challenge. It has a lot less downforce than the old car. And for sure, the rear security is not nearly as good as the old car, or even, honestly, I think, than the DW12. And we just have to work at it. So some of that is there are drivers out there that have just decided to drive through it. But I think also there are other teams out there that have just figured it out better than we have. I think the Andretti team, if you look at the step that they made forward this year, like, they did a really good job. They had a good year. So it's up to us to try and close that gap.
I'm going to go here to interesting one. Just you can tell this is a great IndyCar fan just wanting to learn more about what's happening on pit lane. This comes in from Henry Airback, who says, are there different degrees of scuffed tires? An example, a lightly scuffed tire versus, say, a deeply scuffed tire. And then he's also curious how you would judge the level of scuffing on a tire. Is it by tire temperature or, say, tread depth gauge, durometer, and whatnot? So curious on different levels of scuffness and how you determine scuffness.
Yeah, it's really a matter of how much heat did you put in it and how long were you putting that heat in it.
Yep.
So the tires do have a bit of a mold release on them when they first are given to you. So the least amount of scuff you can do is basically drive out of the pits, just take it easy on them, come back in, don't put really any heat into them, and just take the shine off. Next step of scuff would be probably to run one hard lap or even half a hard lap on them, get some heat in, and let them cure a little. And then probably the next level beyond that would be that they've had one qualifying run on them. A lot of times, red tires, we don't get many sets of those during the race weekend. So if you want to use the options for more than one stint in the race, you probably need to run a used set of reds. So that might be a set that you actually did a run on in qualifying. Pretty rare that I would use a set in the race that is any more used than that. You start to have additional wear on the tire, and then it probably won't go a full stint. But those are the three options and levels. Some of the teams have tire tread temperature sensors on the cars now, and I'm sure those help a lot in terms of judging how much energy you've put into the tires.
I'm going to answer two here real quickly on my own. This one comes in from Bill Prout. Says, if it's not already being done, is there a move going towards using AI, artificial intelligence, data or statistics to help determine when to pit? Says, I can imagine a little robot on the pit stand saying into the radio, statistically, pit now to avoid getting caught out by a yellow. Bill, we do have a variety of options there that you mentioned. One thing that every team does, I know for sure, is look back and do their historical trends, knowing that last year there were X amount of yellows that lasted X amount of laps at these specific stages of the race, and we'll then go back to the year before and look for some trends. So if you know by and large that somewhere around lap 10 or 15 at Barber there has been some sort of yellow over the past 3 or 4 years, again, just trying to look at trends. Most teams will go into the events knowing at least historically what has happened. As for AI saying pit now to get caught out by a yellow, not sure if we're quite there yet, Craig, but I would say most strategists are fully aware at least of the trends, and then you look at all historical trends, but then you also look at who is starting where. Do we have some really fast drivers at the back coming through, which is often a recipe for calamity by some of the slower drivers being caught unaware, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if we could come up with a true AI solution, Craig, that took everything into account to be correct.
Yeah, you have to look at it that race strategy is a bit like going to Vegas and then playing the odds. And so you make your decisions as to whether to pit or not, or whether to go fast now or not, based upon what are the odds of success should a yellow come out again or not come out. So past performance is not a guarantee of future, because every now and then strange things happen, or just because a yellow comes out 60% of the time, 40% of the time it doesn't. However, I do know for sure there are teams in the IndyCar pit lane that at least have big data AI projects underway to help improve their race strategy. I know for sure that that's happening. And I also know for sure that within the Formula One pit lane, they are actively using AI and game theory and machine learning to make their decisions on what tires to put on when, and when to make their pit stops and what should they do when a virtual safety car comes out or a safety car period and all that. So it is definitely happening. I can tell you the last team to do this is going to be Dale Coyne Racing. And the reason of that is Dale Coyne's favorite thing in the whole world is to be the race strategist.
Absolutely.
So the last thing Mr. Coyne wants is some computer telling him what to do. He enjoys race strategy more than you and I enjoy breathing. So that's not on our development list right now.
This is a guy who won the rain-shortened Houston race with Carlos Huertas, okay?
Yeah.
All because Dale has and had a lot of experience having to back time certain races.
Yep.
And it was something that not as many people still had that knowledge. So, yeah, this is a guy who's really good at doing that and isn't keen to give that away. We got two questions here from Don Davis. I'll take the first. He says, what's the update on bringing back the roll hoop LED information lights? I saw them in Scott Dixon's movie and I missed them. Haven't heard anything on that, Don. I will check with Jay Fry next time we speak to see if there's been a different or better vendor that they might test or use. I don't know if you've heard anything on that, Craig. But
yeah, the only thing I have seen is a memo that said we are investigating possible solutions.
There we go.
Which sounded like We don't yet have a possible solution, but we sure know everybody wants one.
There we go.
Yeah, the biggest problem is if they start to fail, and they fail in such a way that it drags the electrical system of the car down and, say, puts a car out of a race, there's going to be a lot of really upset people. So they've got to come up with something that's bulletproof. But, for sure, they add a lot to the fan experience. Certainly want them back.
Next one from Don as well. I know we had a group of drivers recently test new tires at IMS, but isn't the ultimate solution for the return to quality racing at Indy to bring back the attenuators behind the rear wheels to smooth the air coming off the back of the cars? I hear your point, Don, and there's nothing bad about having something that reduces drag behind the very big and draggy rear tires. I'd also just mention that other than, 2012, 13, 14, 15, other than a 5-6 year period, every car that ran at Indianapolis did not have the rear wheel guards behind them, and we've had some fantastic races. So I would not say that pulling the rear wheel guards off of the 2018 race was somehow the thing that turned it into not a great race. So anyways, Craig, but share some thoughts from your end.
I'm gonna beg to differ with you, Marshall.
Okay.
I think what you saw last year was very similar to the races that we used to have, say, with the IR3 Dallara that didn't have wheel pods. And it was exacerbated by the fact that the temperature was very high and we therefore were lacking of downforce. But for sure, we all do know that the air is dirtier behind the car without the wheel pods on it. And I think what everybody is remembering very fondly are the exciting races that we had in the era from 2012 to 2017. And what we had in 2018 is maybe more back to how it used to be, but it was exacerbated by the high temperature. And something else that is not helping us is the fact that there's the hole in the leading edge of the underwing.
Well,
that the underwing is very, very neutered.
We also had the very restrictive rear wing angle as well, which therefore governed how much front wing angle you could use as well.
Yeah, and I can report, and this is good for the fans, IndyCar will be providing us with 2 different optional rear wing wickers for the Indy 500 this coming year. And those wickers give us the ability to add additional downforce to the car, which if it's 92 degrees, we are all going to put on the car, and that's going to help the security for all of us. And like Sebastian, for example, he crashed all on his own in the dirty air trying to pass Alex Rossi, and 100 pounds more downforce would have helped that a lot. So IndyCar is aware that we were shy of downforce last year, and they've produced new parts that we will be able to use this year in May.
Let's go to Ryan Antaya, who says, are there any rules as to what fluids are used, i.e. engine oil, gearbox oil, gear oils, etc.? Are they controlled by, say, X-Track or the engine supplier, or could they be chosen by the team? And would you change brands, grades, or types of fluids based on track type?
Good question. So engine oil and engine coolant is specified by your engine supplier. Yep. So in our case, Honda. The rules, though, are that what we put in there must be commercially available. So Honda cannot cook up some incredibly exotic engine oil that, is very expensive and unavailable to anybody else. So we have to use something that can be purchased off the shelf. And technically that means that the other manufacturer could go out and buy the same oil that Honda is using for the engine. So that's engine oil. And I can certainly understand that the engine manufacturers want that under control as well, because if you want an engine to go for 2,500 miles, putting something that's extremely thin and lacking in good engine protection is not going to work out very well. We control the temperature of the engine to a target despite atmospheric conditions. So even if it's a cold day or a hot day, we actually adjust the amount of blanking on the radiators to try and run the same temperature. We have a target where the engine has its best durability and its best power, and we aim for that. However, your gearbox, teams can do whatever they want.
Yep.
So you'll actually notice a number of lubricant sponsors on different cars, and those teams have partnerships with those lubricant companies, and very often what they're doing is gearbox oil. Is there a huge amount of power available? No, definitely not. But there is probably on the order of 1.5 horsepower available from improving your gearbox oil. And therefore, teams are always after, trying to find the best that they can. There are definitely teams out there that would have, say, different oil for an oval versus a road course. And I think there are teams out there that might have a different oil for qualifying versus the race. It just depends, again, I think, on how fine you're planning to split hairs and who you have as a commercial partner and the kind of efforts that they're willing to put in.
Last question here from our group of technical goodies before we jump over to general questions. One of my favorite areas, actually, where of all the things I would say as a race engineer, I might have had a better grasp than others, and that was tires. This comes in from Ryan Terpstra, who says, do your optimal hot tire pressures change based on what Firestone brings to the track, or is it pretty consistent for street courses? And he also asks, what goes into figuring that out, and what causes you to change them on a pit stop?
All right. So how do we figure it out? I think if you had really good tire data, you could make some judgments on best pressures with that tire data and perhaps with your simulation. I figure that out because I have Sebastian Bourdais driving, and he is incredibly sensitive to tires to the point that he pretty much hates what's going on 92% of the time. And we'll think we have it all just sorted out, and then the track temperature changes by 5 degrees, or another series puts a different kind of rubber down on the track, and it all goes haywire again. We do not necessarily run the same pressure from track to track. We certainly don't run the same pressure from tire spec to tire spec, but even with the same spec tire, you may change the pressure on the basis of the roughness of the track, or how dark the surface finish is, how it absorbs temperature from the sun, all those sorts of things. A lot of variation in that. Now, why would you adjust it during the race? Usually for handling purposes. So you can adjust a tire pressure just to be analogous to the springs on the car. So if you need a stiffer rear spring on the car to affect its handling, you obviously can't change that during the race, change the springs, but you could go up on the rear tire pressures or down on the front tire pressures, or change the right side tire pressures on an oval. So we are adjusting the handling of the car with the tire pressures during the race.
Another thing I'll throw in here, Ryan, and this is just a little fun anecdote from back in the day when I was learning about race engineering, was working with someone who was affiliated with our team and was asked to kind of help him out a little bit. And I remember him telling me, this is I think on a Sports 2000, a Swift DB2, that he knew that the Firestone tires, which they were the supplier then, actually that from that era, that's when I got to meet the great Paige Mader and a few others. 32 PSI. That was the absolute magic tire pressure to hit, and that was universal, right? Hey, we're going to Sonoma. Hey, we're going to Portland. Hey, we're going to where? 32 PSI. That's what we need to hit all 4 corners. And had a really interesting conversation with him that went something along the lines of, you do realize that there are ambient conditions for us to consider here, and that if we're dealing with an extremely cold day, we could artificially pump up your static tire pressures to whatever they need to be to get you to 32, but be it the lack of track temp, the lack of ambient temp, you're probably not going to get there naturally. And, other way around, on an extremely hot day, just keep in mind that this is maybe a little bit lower, Craig. This isn't Firestone's super in-depth IndyCar information and whatnot, helping to at least give you pretty solid ideas of where you're going to end up. But just was trying to impart to him that there's no, quote, magic number. Hey, if we're going to a street course, we always want this tire at this PSI. Based upon what you got and what the Earth is giving you that day, just expect that there's going to be some slight adjustments based on ambient conditions, because obviously the tires don't work in isolation. They react to, as you mentioned, whatever the sun is doing, or the clouds, how that's affecting the track, what is coming back for grip, track surface, quality, blah, blah, blah. So just that was one of my early points of learning, and also trying to impart on someone else that just because it says a number on a page, if you have no other information that also tells you that number works in those conditions, you got to try and just gather a little bit more to make those tires happy in whatever environment they're asked to work in.
Yeah, I mean, the tires run at a much hotter temperature than the ambient temperature of the day. So we will set the tires at what we call cold pressures, which is, the air pressure PSI at which we stick them on the car. And then the driver will go out and drive around, and the tires get hot and the pressure goes up. And so we have a hot pressure target. But you often need to think about, well, what lap are we trying to do our best lap on? Let's say it's qualifying. Are we planning to do our best lap on lap 1, on lap 2, on lap 3, on lap 4? Which of those laps am I targeting for my optimum if it's 32 PSI? So you have to, they're going up by over a PSI per lap. So the pressure that you would start it at cold is dramatically affected by which of those laps you're planning to do your best lap on. And then, of course, some driver gets in your way and you get traffic, or maybe you had a mistake on your best lap, and, okay, now you're doing another lap, but now your tire pressures are higher than you had planned on them being. So all sorts of factors come into play there, but for sure, a good driver, he can tell half a PSI difference for sure. And, if you're off by 1 PSI, things are not good.
No, they aren't. Sorry, I was just looking at some text that came in providing some guidance on what one of the better lap times from testing today at COTA might have been. So I'll share that with you offline here in just a little bit.
Yeah, tire testing at COTA today, and also I believe the Carlin team is evaluating maybe some different options for drivers for the future.
Yes, have heard one. R.C. Enerson was on their testing plans, so yeah, would love to see him.
I'll say that's good, because the few races he did with the Coin team prior to me being with them, he really impressed everybody who worked here. They liked him very much, and they thought he was fast.
Good kid. Yeah, I would love to have him back in the series, and think he's a pretty badass little operator. Granted, it was a small sample size that we had, so we only had him for I think 2 races, but still, definitely showed some strong potential. All right, so let's get to general, and some of these are fun. Some of these are all these questions are great. This comes in again from our pal Kevin Perez Frederico. Says, "Hey Craig, as a diehard Newman Haas fan, any great memories of your tenure there you want to share?" And we've got a couple. Let me grab one of the other ones as well, kind of asking for some old story time with Uncle Craig. There was another one here similar, and I apologize, I should have lumped them together, but asking for something similar, just any fun old Newman Haas stories to share. Nigel Mansell, Mario, Michael Andretti, Paul Tracy. I'm curious about any similarities in driving styles, etc., etc. So, anyways, let's roll back the clock to Newman Haas days back in the day, and any fun stories you might be able to share that stand out.
Oh man, well, there's probably so many. It's hard to just pick them out. the one thing I really do want to impart on people is, Newman Haas was very much like a family. A lot of the employees had been there a real long time. Because we were based up in Chicago, not in Indianapolis, people tended to stay and not move around. We were our own little insulated group here. Carl and Bernie took care of us. Everybody knows Carl could be a bit of an odd character, but Carl and Bernie truly cared about everybody as human beings. And, we socialized together at the end of the day. We went out together on weekends, even if it wasn't a race weekend, went to each other's weddings and things like that. And it was just a really good group of people. And I think what makes a race team is not the shop they have or the equipment they have or the simulator they have. What makes a race team is the people who work there and their knowledge and the effort that they put in. So it was really a special place, and I can guarantee you we didn't realize quite what we had while we were there. The grass always seems greener other places, so you're always complaining about things, but once you didn't have it anymore, I think we all miss it very much. A really great place. I also missed the fact that my commute was like 9 minutes instead of 90. That was a good thing too. But if you look at a list of the people who work there, really special people. Adrian Newey was a race engineer at Newman Haas. Morris Nunn was a race engineer at Newman Haas. Guillaume Rockland, Rocky, who is in charge of all trackside engineering at Red Bull F1, was a race engineer at Newman Haas. Todd Boland, who runs the Joe Gibbs Racing NASCAR side engineering, he was a race engineer at Newman Haas. And then you look at some extremely skilled mechanics who went through there. It's just really a special place. And that's some of what makes Coin very nice for me, is while it's not the same, we still do have a number of people who I did used to work with at Newman Haas. Aside from Sebastian, like Todd Phillips, our chief mechanic, was a Newman Haas guy for a number of years. And we still have a bit of that family atmosphere, and I really appreciate that. Obviously got the chance to work with some great drivers. The person who wrote in mentioned a bunch of them. I did work with Mario and I worked with Nigel, but that was my very first year in professional motor racing. Yeah. So I didn't know what was going on at all. I was really just struggling to make sure the Pi data system worked, and I delivered everything that was expected of me. And it was also kind of awkward because Mario and Nigel did not like each other at all.
No.
Like, that was pretty clear to a guy who was new to it all. So I don't think I had the traditional exposure to two drivers working together and improving the car and all that kind of stuff. But it was still pretty neat to have been able to work with two different legends like that. I did work with Michael Andretti for a long, long time. I got 1 year in there with Paul Tracy. So I got to see, everybody thought it was going to be a bloodbath with Michael and Paul, right? They were going to hate each other and everything, and they got on just fine. So you never quite know what you're going to get.
Let's see. Let's go to Eric Franklin. Great one. Sebastian Bourdais. Sebastian's very blunt in his assessments of the car when it isn't.
No way, you think so?
I know. There's a rumor going around the internet. Eric says very blunt in his assessment of the car when it isn't to his liking. Do you have to have a thicker skin to work with him? Or is that not too different from any other driver? And I just tell you, Eric, it's a little different from a lot of drivers.
Yeah, he is definitely very blunt about it. I'll give you that. We had one towards the end of this year, and his comment was, "I cannot say that the car is bad," which I took to mean the car must be okay, and I'd really like to say it's bad, but I just can't bring myself to say it's bad right now.
The peak of positivity right there.
The thing you have to think about is that it's all coming from a good place. That if you listen to what he's saying and you are able to improve the car to do what it is he wants it to do, you are going to win the race. He's going to do magic and amazing things with it if you can get it feeling like he knows it should be able to feel, like he's aspiring to create. The trouble is it's a very rare thing to actually be able to get there. And sometimes that is hard because you kind of feel like you're failing all the time. The amount of success you get is really, I mean, even if you finish third, but you weren't second or first, you feel like you failed, right? So it's tough. The good news is that we've been doing this together for a long time, and I kind of get where he's coming from, and he gets where I'm coming from. And so, you know, you just talk about it, and you try and make the adjustments the best you can and move along and go. But yeah, no, he's really blunt. And he's really, really sensitive. You know, so I think the same car, two different drivers, you know, Sebastian will have 7 different criticisms of it, and a driver with maybe less experience or less sensitivity will drive it and say, yeah, that's actually pretty good. I think we're close. Whereas Sebastian's never going to let you say we're close because he's always going to be pushing for that last little bit. But as I said, if we can get that last little bit for him and truly cover 90% of what he's asking for, no one's going to touch him. So, you know, you keep working at it. You keep chipping at it.
Constant pursuit of the Holy Grail while acknowledging that it may not exist. It's kind of the Sebastian Bourdais approach of, no, even if we won by 12 seconds, the car could have been better and we should have won by 30 seconds. I mean, and it's, I wouldn't put it down to dickishness. It's just, that is how he is wired. Look, there's never a state of perfection. And so if we allow ourselves to believe we're close, therefore good enough, then we essentially give up on trying to be that little bit better. But mentally, you have to buckle in, man, because if you're someone who needs a lot of pats on the back and a lot of attaboys, yeah, you might not be long for the Sebastian Bourdais crew.
Yeah, I need to point out that this is a man who, I mean, he makes an okay living, right? You know, he's driven in Formula One. He has a nice house in Florida, but like he redid the deck around his pool by himself because
yes.
he couldn't find a contractor that he thought was going to do a nice enough job.
Oh,
you know,
he told me.
He re-stuccoed his house by himself. You know, like he's expecting really good work out of not just the race car, but really kind of everything. Like he's pretty detailed. So, you know, that's a good thing. But I suppose it can also drive you nuts. So,
he reminds me of an old friend and mentor, Thomas Knapp, who was known, I mean, it was the same exact thing. There was never a state where things were really great and you could be happy. There was always someone doing something wrong. As a team manager, as an engineer, he was among the best. But boy, again, if you were the least bit soft, and there were times where I needed to toughen up. Man, it was really unpleasant to work for him. But, and granted, he got fired by, a year after winning the championship with Menard in the IRL, got fired after 99, but because he wasn't very easy to work for. But amazing at what he did. I've always thought of he and Seb being very similar, and I've always thought that if Seb wanted to, I don't think he will, but if Seb ever wanted to, he'd be a hell of a team manager. I don't know, there'd probably be a high turnover rate, but that same exacting philosophy is the kind of thing that will tighten up a ship that needs tightening. If it's already pointing in the right direction, that he might just be pissing people off all the time. But yeah, he does not accept anything less than what, damn near perfection in all aspects of his life.
You know, if I could recommend to people, there's a book out which is a biography of John Barnard, and he is the man who designed the Yellow Submarine, the Chaparral Pennzoil car that won the Indy 500, and then went on to be the chief designer of McLaren, later on Ferrari. He was at Benetton, considered the father of the modern carbon fiber tub. Very good book. You read it, you're just horrified at the way he expects perfection and the way he treats his employees. It must just have been terrifying to work for him. And I'm sure they chewed through people, and there were, people looking for the eject button all the time. But on the other hand, you read it and you're like, man, this guy is really impressive at the level that he's detailing things and how he's pushing the technology of racing forwards. I think people who are amazing artists are often very difficult people. And there's an element to that insanity that brings out the beauty or the perfection or the greatness. And, everything takes all kinds, right?
Our pal Andrew C. says, Craig, what's your favorite track to engineer? And he says, knowing that it may not necessarily be your favorite track in reality, but just from a general engineering discipline standpoint, is it a current track or a past track that IndyCar visited where you're like, hey, I love doing my job trying to solve this puzzle at this specific circuit?
Ooh, see, it's kind of two different things. So the engineer, I think, can make a bigger difference in terms of your competitiveness at the ovals. And for sure, for Indianapolis, the teams put a lot more money and effort into research and development and trying to tweak and tune all the little details on the car to make it as fast as possible. It's really not right that so much effort is put into one single race, but the reality is that the prestige of winning that race is far more than winning the championship. The money for winning that race is far more than you get for winning the championship. So a huge amount of effort is to put into that one race. And so in terms of the role of the engineer and really the engineering staff, where can we make a difference? It is Indianapolis. And to some extent, it's qualifying at Indianapolis. It's the pure speed of the car. Having said that, I don't really enjoy going to Indianapolis all that much, and I don't enjoy it all that much because I am fully aware of how dangerous it is. I am always a little on edge at any of the super speedways because bad things can happen. We saw that at Pocono this year. We saw that with Sebastian 2 years ago in qualifying at Indy. We saw that with Hinchcliffe at Indy. You're going so fast that when anything goes wrong, it's really dangerous. And so do I like going to the speedways? No, not at all. If you ask me which track I just most like going to, it's probably Elkhart Lake. The cars have stretched their legs there. They're beautiful to watch there. It's a great environment. It's kind of our home track. But, where as an engineer can I make the most difference? It's Indianapolis.
Let's see. Jameen Tuttle says, Craig, if you were a team owner and had to hire a couple of drivers for your new IndyCar team other than Sebastian Bourdais.
Oh, thank God they put that part in. Okay, good.
We got to distance yourself from that guy. If you couldn't hire Seb, if you were starting a team, couldn't hire Seb, is there anyone among the current drivers or outside of IndyCar that you'd say, all right, got to go get those two?
I could get myself in trouble here because guys that walk up to me in the paddock and be like, you picked him and not me.
So then you just tell them to do better. Do better.
Yeah, that's dangerous. Well, everybody knows Scott Dixon is the guy to beat, right? He's just a consummate professional. He always seems to be icy cool. He's got a lot of championships, leads a lot of laps, very, very rarely makes a mistake. So he's probably the veteran that you would pick and try and build around. Now, having said that, the word on Scott is that he can drive a setup that nobody else can drive.
Yes. So
you maybe need to be very careful about the other driver you pick to pair with Scott, because you ideally have two guys who are asking for the same thing out of the car. So now you want me to pick a young guy who could drive the same kind of car as Scott. And again, I haven't worked with a lot of the guys, so it's hard. But what about Esteban Ocon? He's kind of out of a ride, right? Like, we don't know where he's going or what he's going to be doing. I think to make an F1 car go fast, you have to drive it pretty neutral. He's probably got a lot of experience in a simulator and things like that. So I'm going to hire Scott Dixon as my veteran, and my brand new guy will be Esteban Ocon, and we'll see what happens from there.
There we
How's
go.
that?
Let's get that budget over. That's the Craig Hampson GoFundMe page.
I think I might have picked almost the most expensive possible driver lineup right there.
Let's see. Curtis Cleveland. Brilliant question. Does Dale get mad if someone passes on his barbecue?
I don't think anybody passes on his barbecue. The stuff is really good.
He actually, at a test earlier this year, he was like, come on over. I mean, it was like, no, come eat. It was like fixing me a plate. Like, just, he's so nice.
Yeah, no, the stuff, if you're in Florida, absolutely go to a Sonny's Barbecue restaurant. And I love the ribs, and the pulled pork is really good too. But it's one of those deals, like every time we test at Sebring, Dale will bring in food from the restaurant for lunch or dinner, and I eat way more than I should because it really is that good. So nobody ever passes, so he doesn't get mad. That
is Sleepy Craig, race engineer, snoring during the Sebring short course testing. Let's see. Todd Peterson asks, and anybody who's worked with this character would have them, any Tim Coffeen stories to share?
Oh, goodness. Fino, hippie, Tim Coffeen, longtime Newman Haas mechanic. What a great guy. One of the quality human beings in racing. I would venture he's probably Robin Miller's best friend.
Yeah, he and Sean.
Sprint cars together for a long time. Timmy was my chief mechanic the year that I ran James Hinchcliffe, and we won Rookie of the Year all together at the last year of Newman Haas. Okay, let's see here. A good Timmy story. So we're at Mid-Ohio, and we're at the hotel bar one night, and there is a gal there, and she has a big, huge bow in her hair like Minnie Mouse. And she has definitely taken a liking to Tim Coffeen, and she flutters her eyelashes at him and says, "You look just like Clark Gable." And to this day, we all talk about that. That was pretty cool.
Wow.
He was a good-looking gentleman. I think he's probably actually. I could go with how old Timmy is, because the joke was always, I was born the year he graduated high school, which I always thought meant that he was old and I was young. Until now that I'm at Dale Coyne Racing, and the guy who's my assistant engineer, he was born the year I graduated college. So the age discrepancy is even bigger. So now I'm the old man.
Wow.
Tim is a great guy. Still lives in Indianapolis now, doing some historic race car stuff. I think he's one of the few people who has free reign down in the basement of the Speedway Museum, and he knows all about the history of the Speedway. He could probably tell you about every car that's down there.
He's also done some Pirelli World Challenge stuff this season too.
Yeah, so, he does fly-in work for Black Dog Racing.
Yep.
Which is actually located very near the old Newman Haas shop, run by a guy named Ray Sorensen, who was another Newman Haas mechanic. So there's a number of Newman Haas guys there. I don't think they have any need for me, but it would be a nice spot on the retirement ladder for Craig Hampson if they ever do need me.
All right, let's wind down to the final few here, my friend Nathan Carter. I hope your answer is no, because you might be taking jobs away from me and Miller here. Would you ever consider a commentary role? Craig was very insightful during an Indy 500 practice or qualifying interview a couple years ago. I think IndyCar broadcasts would benefit from an engineer's perspective. And I'll just say a little sidebar here. Nathan, you're spot on. Craig would be amazing.
Well, I appreciate the compliment. Thank you very much. Yeah, I would be interested in doing that. If it's something that can help bring the sport to more people or grow the sport or explain a side of the sport that maybe doesn't get covered as much, Yeah, I would be very interested in doing something like that. I suspect I have a face for radio, not for TV, so that could be a problem.
Look, Paul Tracy
I
and Robin Miller are on the NBCSN
yeah, that's true.
broadcast.
I can't argue you there. Both Paul and Robin have made it onto television, so I'd probably have to work a little not to put everybody to sleep.
Oh, stop it.
I have 2 daughters and a wife, and they look at me and roll their eyes and say, "You're not about to start mansplaining again, are you?" And yes, I might do that from time to time. But thank you for the compliment, and yeah, that is something maybe someday in the future. That could be cool.
Couple here that are a little bit technical-ish, but I didn't drop them into the technical area because they seem a little bit wider in answers possibly. Brian Smith says, how much can we really learn from the recent IMS test when the weather in May will be much different? And do you think the changes will have a major impact on the race next year? And this is referring to, what was it, last week's, I believe, Firestone tire test, or the one within the last 10 days or so ago that were definitely in much cooler conditions than the Bake-a-thon last May.
Yeah, I mean, I actually went and was allowed to observe. They asked us to stay on the other side of the chain link fence from the pit lane if we weren't running a car. But I was down there. One of the other race engineers, Blair Persbacher, who's at Schmidt-Peterson, he was there as well, and we were hanging out and watching the festivities. For sure, it's not ideal that the conditions were so disparate. Yeah, ambient temperature very different, track temperature very different. The things that they learned were that the new right front tire construction is universally preferred. So that was confirmed across all the drivers, and that helps the balance of the car. So that will be an improvement. We proved to no one's surprise that adding downforce makes the car feel more secure.
What?
So, yeah, no, seriously, I'm stunned. But, yeah, more downforce, it sticks better through the corners. So, you know, that was good that they ran that part and everything went as it should. There was a treatment on the front wing that Dallara has developed based upon some of their CFD work. I think the jury is still a little out on that, though it seems like it isn't worse. So, you know, I think they've made some changes that are going to help. Is it revolutionary? No, it's not revolutionary. But was it incrementally better? Yes. Kind of from what I watched, the front 3 cars could trade spots back and forth at will. You know, so at the front of the field, I think it looks like a pretty good race. I would say if you were stuck back in 6th place, you were pretty much stuck in 6th place. It looked really hard to move from 6th to 5th or 5th to 4th. But, you know, IndyCar knows that the show that we put on last year wasn't quite what we want. And they've made some changes that hopefully are going to be better. And keep in mind, we'll now have another year of experience with the car. Everybody will make some changes to improve the handling. We have some more of a sense of what it needs. And May would have been totally different if it had been 75 degrees rather than 92 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
I also want to point out that, like, Will Power and Dave Faustino and the Penske team, they ought to be really proud of what they accomplished. Because those were really hard conditions, and they had the best car.
They solved the puzzle that almost
they solved the puzzle better
could.
than anybody else,
yeah.
And they should be proud of that. You know, it shouldn't be easy. And I will say, having watched the test, you know, Will Power was there. I thought he had the best handling car at the test, too. So they haven't lost the setup sheet, unfortunately. But, yeah, it's our job to catch them.
Next one from Mike Jablo says, Craig, can you please explain the role of each engineer on the team and the area of data or data acquisition they are responsible for? And also mention, Mike, each team is usually configured a little bit differently. I mean, there's a lot of consistency, but, you know, some teams will over-provision in one area or the other. Some teams will have fewer engineers on the timing stands, so it's not a universal thing, but it may be within the Dale Coyne universe. Can you tell us
what I can tell you what we have on our timing stand. So we have 3 engineers on the timing stand. We have the race engineer, that's me. in charge of the overall decision-making process for that car in terms of setup, interfacing with the driver, deciding what changes we're going to make, communicating those changes to the mechanics, keeping track of a lot of the paperwork, tire pressures, what tires are we going to put on and when. We have an assistant race engineer, and he is looking at data, be it timing and scoring data or the collected car performance data. And typically the assistant race engineer is dealing with the higher level performance stuff. I might say, okay, it's clear from the timing splits that we are really bad in turn 2. The driver says it's doing this in turn 2. What do you see in the data there, and what recommendations can you make to try and improve that? Also, the assistant race engineer very often is a simulations kind of person. And then the data engineer, sometimes called a DAG, data analysis geek.
Yep.
Yeah, data acquisition geek. That's more an entry-level position usually. That person's job is to calibrate the data system, to program the data system, to operate the data system, to keep the telemetry running, to make sure all the sensors are working right, tends to set up and take down the timing stand, offload the data from the car, make sure the right comments are in the data set, and then sometimes the health and operation of the car, meaning temperatures, is the engine running, engine temperatures proper, does the gearbox have oil pressure, things like that. And that's kind of the career progression as well. You would be the data engineer for a few years, then if an opportunity comes up, you become an assistant race engineer, you show knowledge and you show ability at that, and eventually you'll be given an opportunity to be a race engineer.
Beautiful. And I can say that during my time having been a race engineer and an assistant engineer, the assistant engineer was often both roles, so both the DAG and the assistant kind of rolled into one. But keep in mind, if I'm talking IndyCar, I'm rolling back the clock almost 15, 20 years ago.
And I will say, actually, on the Andretti stand now, they are only running 2 engineers. And on the Ganassi stand, they only run 2 engineers. They might have a wiring data kind of person who does other stuff back at the shop, or they have a floater between the different cars, and they maybe have a full-time simulation engineer or a full-time damper engineer, a full-time design engineer that we don't have. So it just depends how you want to organize it all. The fact is, with Dale Coyne Racing, we take everybody to the racetrack. We don't have stay-at-home people, whereas a lot of the larger teams have a considerable number of stay-at-home people who might be rebuilding things or working on other R&D kind of projects, whereas it's all hands on deck for us.
David Nixick. This one I think folks really enjoy learning about. Craig, can you explain how a 7-post rig is used for development? And can you simulate specific tracks for setup? And if so, how is the track modeled and then used on that 7-post rig?
All right, 7-post rig, or a shaker rig. So 4 of the posts are actuators that go underneath the tires, the wheel pans. And so those model the bumps of the track. And then there are 3 actuators which attach to the sprung mass of the car, the body, the chassis of the car. And those are modeling both downforce and the inertial characteristics of the mass of the car, say, as it goes up and down, elevation changes, things like that. Really, really, really complicated topic, and we will not get into all the crazy stuff here, but basically you can do something called a track replay. So you evolve the way that those hydraulic actuators move up and down to mimic the movement of the body of the car and the loads on the tires of the car as it drives around the actual track. And it looks incredibly violent. In fact, you look at it, you're just like, no way is that what's actually happening to the car. But it is. The data, you take your collected track data for a circuit that you've been to, you run a known setup, and then you basically evolve the actuators until you match that known setup. And then from there, you can start changing shock absorbers usually, maybe springs, maybe anti-roll bars, to try and improve how the platform is or how the grip is of the tires. It's a real art, however. I wouldn't say the hit rate is fantastic in terms of like you can guarantee that something better on the shaker rig ends up being better on the track. Also, there's a lot of driver opinion in this. So just because it's better on the shaker, maybe one driver will prefer it, but the other one won't. And there are always compromises as well. Like soft springs will always be better for grip, but they're really bad for the movement of the car, the platform control of the car, the stability of the car, the security. So there's always compromises. So a lot of, the speed a team can get is if you have some really clever damper analysis guys, shaker rig guys, who work on these sorts of things. So we have Olivier Besson. He really knows what he's doing. I wish we could get him more shaker rig days because I think every time he goes there, we learn things and we can get better. But we don't own our own shaker rig. Penske, for example, does own their own shaker rig. They've got Dave Faustino and the people who work underneath him. And clearly they're really good because I'd say generally the agreement in the paddock is the ride control on the Penske cars is the best. You watch them go over curbs and over bumps and then recover after that. And they kind of take like one little casual bounce and then they settle and off they go. And, we'll get like somebody come and observe, they'll come, oh, the Penske's look much better than your car off the bump in turn 2. I'm like, yep, I know that.
Thanks.
So thank you. What are they doing to do that? Oh, I don't know that. Well, therein lies the problem, right? Shaker rig, dampers, ride control, platform control, that's the whole key to making these things go quick.
See, I keep asking if I can borrow a set of dampers off of one of the Penske cars just to take a look inside. They keep saying no, Craig. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
they're not nice.
I'd love to know what's inside. I mean, I'm sure there's an inverter inside. You can see that they are something that they've made themselves. There is a Penske dampers, and you can buy Penske dampers, but that's a separate company, and that's like a license deal.
Yep.
The Penske dampers that we buy and put on our car are not what the Penske IndyCar team is running. I mean, their dampers, they're little works of art. They're cast magnesium bodies,
Oh, yeah.
There's probably a lot of really neat stuff going on inside there. And
alien.
Someday, okay, here's the open
technology.
invitation. Yeah, Dave Faustino, when we're really old and we can go out and have a beer at some point, like we're retired, I'd love to know. I'd love for you to tell me just someday. That'd be great. I'd love to know.
See, on that topic, and I love the Big Eagle for this, even to his dying day, there were areas of the 1991 through 1993 All-American Racers Eagle Mark III GTP car.
Oh, what a beautiful car. Yeah, that was a great car.
The Big Eagle refused to discuss or explain. 15, 20 plus years, 25 years after the car had been retired, there were still areas that he did not want to open up to share what they'd learned, what they did that was special or secret. So, I don't know how many years good old Davey's going to make you wait, but that would be a fun. I'd love this. Hopefully, I'm there for that beer just to listen.
Yeah, there'll be a book. Well, I come back to that John Barnard book. There's probably a whole lot of stuff in that book that he never thought he would be divulging to the world.
See?
But it's a great read. Yeah, it's a lot of really interesting stuff. If you like the technical stuff and you want to understand why some things are done and how guys think, you definitely should read that book. And I recommend the Adrian Newey autobiography as well.
Yes. Oh, yes.
He's definitely not as in-depth because he's still active and doesn't want to reveal as much, but that's another really good book.
Okay, we're gonna head home here with a couple of questions that are on a side of the sport that I know it's very dear to you and to me. We've got two that are fairly similar. One from a Reddit group under the screen name Tasty Chevelle, and also one again from Mark Brown, who said, "Hey guys, was wondering about the STEM and motorsports engineering special podcast that you did with our friends at Dinner with Racers, and was mentioning that Mark was unable to find that. Said he has a son who's been working in STEM on the education side, learning for the past 5 years. He's in an engineering academy at his high school. He wants to join the ranks of IndyCar engineers. And Andrew C. was kind enough to grab that link to the Your Dinner with Racers Young Engineer podcast, so Mark's gotten that. And then also we had Tacey Chevelle say, how would you recommend an aspiring race engineer get his or her start out of college? Do they need a mechanical engineering degree or no racing engineering degree to eventually work his or her way up to a team in IndyCar?
I think if you're going to be a race engineer at this point, you do need a degree.
Yeah.
There are still race engineers who don't have the degree.
I'm raising my hand right now, but again, I started this 30-plus years ago.
On the older side at this point, I think to break into the sport now and to be able to do the things, the analysis that you're expected to do, you really should get a degree.
Be smarter than me, please.
Well, not smarter, but I think the fact that you've gotten the degree demonstrates to the employer that you started something that was really hard and you finished it. And that's a good characteristic to put ahead already. And then you really do use a lot of math and physics and computer science and programming in what we do. So having been exposed to that kind of stuff at the academic level is important. And I think also when students come in from university level, there's a lot of cool stuff going on at university and a lot of cutting edge things. And I think they can bring new things to a team that maybe the people entrenched at the team haven't seen before or haven't thought about before. So it's always good to get new blood in that way. So for sure, I would say go out there, get an engineering degree. Most likely it would be a mechanical engineering degree. We don't tend to do a lot of aerodynamic stuff in IndyCar because the car is so spec, but an aerospace engineer would have a lot of the same skills. Computer science is a helpful thing. Controls engineer would be good, particularly with some of the damper stuff. Electrical engineer, there's some use for that. Computer science guy, programming, there's some use for that. Even like IT kind of things and networking, there's uses for that. So, I think just demonstrating the fact that you've been able to use your mind at a high level and solve some fairly complex problems. You do have some math skills, all of that's pretty valuable. So get a degree in something. Now, how do you get in? That's the $1 million question. Because jobs are scarce. And a lot of the time it requires somebody to leave and open up before, you can get in there. But knowing somebody helps, and the way you know somebody is that you go to events and you talk to people and maybe you volunteer and help. And maybe you do it at a lower level than IndyCar, that you help in the sports car world, or the Pirelli World Challenge, or at an SCCA level. Eventually you'll meet people who can introduce you to other people. And at the end, it really is a people business. And, if you can just get your foot in the door and get a handshake or a face-to-face meeting or your resume handed over, that could help a lot. So absolutely, when you're at school, you've got to find a school that's got a Formula SAE program, and you have to participate in Formula SAE, because that's a differentiator on a resume, and it shows you've been thinking about race cars and you're enthusiastic about race cars and you're willing to put in the time. So join an SAE program and learn to design parts for the car, learn to build the car, learn to use the machinery that you need to build the car. Good thing to learn is to wire the car. Learn about wiring the kind of autosport connectors that we use on race cars, the high-quality aerospace stuff. Learn about suspension geometries, tires. Formula SAE is really important, so I would say do that. The other thing I was thinking about is that there are certain kinds of software packages that we use a lot within racing, and if you can learn about those, that's a good thing. data acquisition systems are really important. So if you have experience speccing out data systems and using sensors and calibrating them, logging rates, logging tables, stuff like that. Excel. If you become a very good user of Microsoft Excel, you can program in Virtual Basic maybe inside Excel. That's a good thing.
It's a very popular. It might be a popular Microsoft thing. You'd be amazed how critical and important Excel is for so many things done in the engineering world. Not just the programming side, but just I mean,
on anything,
everything.
There's another package called MATLAB, which I'm pretty sure is free to students. Learn to use MATLAB. You learn to code in MATLAB. It's incredibly powerful. You can do all sorts of things in that. And then if you also taught yourself to program in something like Python or C#, C++, those kinds of skills are also, I think, pretty useful for a motor racing team. Mechatronics are a big thing now. The combination of mechanical things with electrical things. You know, the car has just computers all over it. The gear shift system, the clutch system, the engine is all computer controlled. We have the telemetry, the weight jacker. So if you have those things combined together, you know, a mechatronic engineer has a lot of things that he can be contributing on a race car.
I'll mention this quickly as well, and I just know this from personal experience, Craig. This is before the engineering side, but granted, if I was going to school or knew that I wanted to be a race engineer beforehand, then that would have been great. I just came in as a mechanic first and then learned from good folks like our mutual friend and your colleague, Michael Cannon, and so on. But go to, as Craig mentioned, I would say specifically club races, something local, SCCA, even NASA. And if the questions here about becoming an IndyCar engineer, if you do want to be an open wheel engineer in the top levels, go to your local club races, whether you know anything about engineering or not, or even if you're close to finishing your degree. Go and look for some folks running some either Formula Fords, Formula Fs, 2-liter cars, something open wheelish, maybe with slicks and wings, maybe just with slicks, who knows. Volunteer. Go and do that. Get your hands dirty, turn wrenches, put wheels on and off, change brake pads, change oil, do all the dirty things, and prove that you can do them well, which usually then gets you invited to learn a little bit more, maybe start helping with the setup, and it might be really basic. Hey, could you string the car, please? We want to check the tow. You're not checking it, but I'm asking you to put the devices on the car to do it at least. And the ability to do that, and the reason why I think this can be a really invaluable thing, just as Craig mentioned on the hardcore engineering side, if you can, learn to code, learn to do this, so many other things. On the mechanical side, if you know how a car goes together, you know what it's like to prep one, you understand what it's like to do setup on one. If you're looking for work as a future engineer, you're going to want to get to a Road to Indy team, USF 2000, Pro Mazda, Indy Lights, on your way to IndyCar probably. If you can go to those teams and say, hey, you don't have to teach me a whole bunch. I'm not coming here naked, basically, saying, I want to be a race car engineer. Could you teach me everything about this profession? If you can come in and say, you know what, on my own, I've already covered a lot of the basics, so I can actually be a true asset to you while learning more about this trade that I'm hoping to pick up. That's going to move you up a hell of a lot higher than some folks basically saying, hi, I have a degree, now teach me everything how to do the job I want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you need to show some level of auto racing experience, because there are going to be other candidates who are equally bright and have equal amounts of engineering skills, but they've hung around a race car team because they've shown they really want it. There was one summer in grad school that every weekend I drove from West Virginia to New Jersey to help with a circle track car, which the dude would wreck every weekend. And then I'd drive back, and then we'd go do that again all summer. But, you know, hey, I was working on a late model circle track car on an asphalt oval, and that was a useful thing to learn. coin is small. We don't have a lot of people, but to this day, I will still fire up the lathe or fire up the mill and help make parts that we may need. Because I at least do know how to operate those machines. I mean, usually it's bad if I'm the one making the parts. Like, that means we've hit DEFCON 4 crisis level, but, I do know how to use them. And I know how to use them because I participated in Formula SAE 30 years ago.
All right, I've saved the last question here from our friends at Reddit again. Emerson, Lake, and Lagoon is the person's username. I like this question, Craig, because it'd be interesting to hear your answer. So as someone like myself in my new role as a reporter and also a photographer who goes out trackside and is close to the cars, I get to see all kinds of things happening dynamically, how drivers tend to, demonstrate what they do in their driving style, and look at the engineering aspect of what the cars are doing. You don't get to do that on a timing stand, but our friend here, Emerson, Lake, and Lagoon, says, to what degree can you tell, Craig, what the other teams are doing with their cars that might be different than yours? So, not saying this is cloak and dagger snooping on others, but what are some of the things that you use or methods you use to try and figure out, hey, we see that Team X is going pretty quickly today. Wonder what they're doing that might be different than us.
Well, obviously, sometimes you can watch, but all that really tells you is that, hey, their car looks more composed or balanced in a certain corner. We have timing splits that we look at pretty regularly to know where we might be deficient or where the car might be performing well, and you can look at that. You can look at that actually during the session even. Some teams have spy photographers on a pretty regular basis. We don't really have the luxury of that. But it's good to look at photographs of other people's cars. Maybe you can see some sort of, approach that they've taken to something. Walking up and down pit lane, you'll eyeball wing angles. You'll try to get some idea of which suspension geometry they have on the car because everybody has the same options for suspension geometry.
I was going to mention the Engineer's March, as I call it, which is fun, especially during single car qualifying on ovals, for example, but definitely on pre-grid for a race where you tend to see, like, hey, isn't your car on the pole? Why is he all the way back here looking at the cars in 20th place or whatever?
It's ridiculous because, like, every race engineer is walking up and down pit lane staring at everybody else's cars and, like, writing down what rear wing angle they have on.
Oh, yeah.
And I have joked, actually, that there should just be a website where we all have to put our settings on because we're all doing exactly the same thing. We'll nominate Todd Malloy this weekend, and it's his job to write down everybody's settings, and then he'll distribute it to everybody because we're all doing exactly the same thing. But I guess it's part of the game, and if you watch, for example, Penske, you're not allowed wing covers, but if you watch, Penske will have cleverly piled their pit crew helmets on the rear wing in just such a way that it's very difficult to tell what's going on.
What?
So you can't have a wing cover, but you can be smart about this. The guy Ray Gosselin, who is Ryan Hunter Ray's race engineer, he will roll the car out to pit lane at some wing setting that is absolutely not what he is going to run. And he is going to switch it to the setting that he is going to run at the last possible moment. So there's all this like fun and games going on. But I think in the end, you are trying to do the best job for you, for your team, for your car's handling, for what your driver needs. If you spend too much time looking at everybody else, I think you'll just get yourself confused. And if you truly believe in yourself and your methods and the tools you're using, you should keep an eye on everybody, but you really need to stay the course on the path that you have chosen.
Well, speaking about confusion, having Craig Hampson on the Week in IndyCar is a fine way to remove all kinds of confusion. As I've told you before, you're a gem, Craig. I really do appreciate it when you take time to not only field questions from our listeners, all who are big IndyCar fans, but clearly there are a lot of people who just want to know more, better grasp what they watch, appreciate the work that you do and all the drivers do, and really just trying to become smarter as IndyCar is on this slow but gradual uphill climb. So thanks for taking some time, my man.
Thank you for inviting me on to talk and chat. I appreciate that. I want to thank all the fans, because without the fans, we don't have a sport. And also, I encourage everybody to patronize the sponsors that you see on the sides of the car, because they truly are they're the ones making the sport possible. And beyond that, I just wish everybody a happy holiday season. I hope everybody is healthy and safe, and we'll see you in the new